Hello, how are you today? Set that up properly. There we go. Alright, it's good to have all of you here online, those who are watching live as well as those who watch subsequently. We have to continue with today's class where we ended. The network is a bit bad today, it seems, so I hope you won't have any challenges catching me. Should you find yourself challenged catching me, please just send me a message and I'll be able to see how we can adjust it. Alright, this is class 7. We're making steady progress, I think. So I'm glad and grateful for all those who have continued to support what we're trying to do here. As you may be aware, I am not charging anything for this. There's no monetary benefit or anything from this. I think what is important is that we continue to nurture a generation that is woke, that is educated, and that is aware of its surroundings. Most of the classes I'm giving are actually master's level classes, but I feel like they can benefit the majority from people doing bachelor's of degrees. PJ, thank you for coming through. From people doing your diplomas, including master's students themselves. I also feel that it can also impact certain people in different fields, from law to philosophy, psychology, sociology, as well as other humanitarian aspects of life. Also people that are just curious about other sides of life, like the side of life that we find ourselves in. For example, the class we are going to undertake today will cover conflict handling styles. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. We can look at it as a theoretical thought, as in conflict handling styles to do with conflict relations and whatever, conflict resolution. But these are day-to-day skills. Okay? Aside from using them in academic spaces, these are day-to-day skills that you can benefit from. You can find yourself in a situation that would require you to apply certain restraint, certain, aggressiveness, certain, I don't know. But the class or the things that you hear from today may be able to apply to your day-to-day activities. So that's why I found it important that we bring it open on my Facebook Live so that others who may not even be politicians or political scientists or philosophers will still benefit from the classes that we're offering. And that's why they remain on my page. For those of you that like to follow up, they remain on my page. And I'll select the classes that we give in such a way as to test their applicability over a wider range of schools of thought. Okay, so today's class will be very short. We're going into conflict handling styles. It's something you can relate to, whether or not you are in political science, whether or not you are a philosopher, a sociologist. It's something you'll be able to, or a psychologist, you can still relate. Today's class, I must give credit to Major General Vincent Mukanda, who is a research fellow at the Dag Hammarskjöld Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies and former Zambia Army Deputy Commander, who has been very resourceful and whose materials I will largely rely on in today's class. So, General, thank you so much for your unwavering mentorship. Alright, so we'll get into understanding conflict management styles, and then we will look at the Thomas Kuhlman conflict mode instrument. It's the main instrument that we'll study today, the TKI, the Thomas Kuhlman conflict mode instrument. Okay? Alright, so conflict is an inevitable part of work We've all seen situations where people with different goals and needs have clashed, and we've all witnessed the often intense personal animosity that can result from conflict and clashes between human beings. So the fact that conflict exists, however, is not necessarily a bad thing when you resolve it effectively, that is. You can also eliminate many of the hidden problems that it brought to the surface. So oftentimes, conflict between people has the ability to bring to the surface, to reveal other hidden or obscure grievances that individuals may possess. So when you engage in conflict with someone, oftentimes that is when it reveals some of the things that you actually hold within you that may not be favorable to the other person. So, but conflict can also be damaging if you don't handle it effectively. That is, it can quickly turn into personal dislike. Teamwork can break down, and talent may be wasted as people disengage from their work. All right. So conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. That is according to Max Lucado. He says conflict is inevitable. So no matter what happens, we're going to differ some way or another. Even just by being on this life, I'll probably differ with people, on different issues. But combat is optional. The fact that you differ with people does not mean that you should engage with them, in active combat. So that is optional. So conflicts can arise at any time. We've established that. And to utilize conflict resolution strategies, it depends on both conflict style and conflict resolution skills. All right? So the style of conflict and the way in which you conduct yourself during the conflict and throughout the conflict, and the way that you conduct the conflict, as well as your skills in resolving conflict, also play a huge role. So many different ways to respond to conflict situations. Some styles involve a considerate or cooperative approach. Others involve either a competitive or a passive approach. So proper conflict resolution training allows you to understand how to diffuse the situation and reach an agreement that satisfies all parties. Okay, so you do need some form of training sometimes to be able to place you in the right framework to respond to conflict. So for most favorable outcome, consider handling style appropriate for the disagreement at hand. There are different handling styles for different types of conflict. The best way to respond is to understand what type of conflict you're dealing with, and in essence to respond with a much more appropriate style. So the first step in conflict resolution is understanding the various styles of conflict, and this is what we're going to get into today. Okay, so in disputes, it is often easier to describe how others respond than to understand how we respond. Okay, so you easily notice that you are very rude. Why are you talking to me like that? Why are you raising your voice without realizing that your own voice might be raised, or that you have clenched fists, or that you have folded arms, and all these are messages in conflict. So each of us has a predominant conflict style that we use to meet our own needs. Some of us are quiet people, and we do conflict in different ways. We harbor, whatever we feel bottled up, and then we explode at once. Some of us express ourselves on a daily basis, and we say it there and then. Some of us would demand to see the manager without fail, and others would just say, it's fine. So we all have different styles that are predominant in us, in how we respond to conflict. Some of us, easy to get violent, and others no. We all differ. So by examining your personal conflict styles, and as well as the consequences of your behaviors, you can gain a better understanding of the impact of your personal conflict styles and what the impact that it has on other people. So the best way, one of the first steps in understanding your personal conflict styles is to assess the consequences of your behavior when you are in conflict. Okay? Does it always happen that every time you find yourself in conflict, you find yourself behind bars, arrested? Or does it always happen that every time you find yourself in conflict, you find yourself crying in bed? Does it happen that every time you find yourself in conflict, there are different ways that different people respond to different circumstances and that involve conflict. So you must understand your way of responding to conflict. It's very important. And the best way to understand this is by assessing the consequences of your behaviors when you are involved in conflict. So with a better understanding, you make a conscious choice on how to respond to others in a conflict situation to help reduce work conflict and stress. All right? When you understand yourself, when you say, okay, normally when I find myself in conflict, I tend to retaliate. So then whenever you find conflict, you withdraw yourself from that situation. You say, no, this is not the space in which I am most productive. Or some of us, question ourselves on why we do not respond more when people, push us around. And when you find yourself in that space and you're about to withdraw and you say to yourself, no, take your stand, So all these methods and all these ways in which people respond to conflict situations. Let's get into conflict management styles, okay? Try and understand them. It's a very short class. We're already halfway through. Okay, so what is conflict management style? Conflict management style is a form of behavior that a person practices in response to conflict with others. A form of behavior that a person practices in response to conflict with others. When you are living and interacting with others, you need to know how to resolve issues in different situations. Okay, you need to know how to resolve. When you're living in a boarding house, for example, it's imperative for conflict to break out. But what if every time you have an issue with the fact that the dishes are always dirty? How do you respond? Do you break the dishes the next time you come into the kitchen? Do you wash the dishes? Do you call a meeting? So you need to understand that when you live with people, and this is whether it's at home, in our homes, or whether it is at work, in our workspaces, or whether it is in our interactions in society, we live among and interact with human beings. So it's inevitable conflict will take place. So we have looked at the various causes of conflict from a political perspective. Okay. However, from a social perspective, here are some of the other causes of conflict that are embedded even in the political and economic and social and whatever. They are all together, but these are some of the social, oriented aspects of conflict. They include your goals. Okay, most of the times human beings have conflicting goals and priorities, and these things may differ. You want to go to this certain point and another person wants to go to this certain point, and you find yourselves clashing on the means in which you get there, on the ways in which you get there. It happens, and it's very normal. So goals can be a source of conflict. Personality conflicts, all right? These are approaches to things and as well as lifestyles. There are certain people that sleep with the lights off, others that sleep with the lights on. There are certain people that that are very serious, or that hold very strong views about how the toilet seat should be, whether it should be closed or lift up or things like that. Those are just minor examples. But on a larger scale, conflict does exist even on the basis of personality. Okay, even countries sometimes have personalities, and they may differ. And to the most minimum, even as human beings especially, we have personalities, and our personalities may differ. Others are outgoing, others are more inbound, there's a lot of differences that exist, and our approaches to life, our approaches to things, our lifestyles may all come into conflict, or may bring us into positions where we are in conflict with others. Scarce resources may lead to competition, and this may result in conflict. We've discussed a lot about this when we're dealing with natural resources and the environmental element of conflict. So scarce resources come up as a very predominant source of conflict, because they lead to competition, and we compete for the little that is there. Our values, they also challenge us, okay? And the values are core. Adapting with styles it's one thing, but dealing with conflict values is another. All right, so it's one thing to adapt our values to the styles of conflict that we have or that we prefer, but it's another to deal with values when they conflict. Because values are not easily compromised. Values are held very strongly. So when they differ, it becomes a problem. Most people tend to find themselves in situations that are not, favorable, especially when conflict occurs with things to do with our value system. Okay? And so sometimes you find conflict in your values, in your value system. You will differ with people, and it's important to always to understand others and to try and work with others. So that's why a particular business group or culture may not be a good fit for you. All right. So sometimes you find yourself with friends and family, and sometimes the society you're in just doesn't fit for you, and it happens. It's also why the saying birds of same feathers flock together, okay, and why they say also that opposites attract but similarities bind, okay. So these are the issues to do with values. They involve a lot, and you must be able to understand them, okay. So conflict is not completely negative. Mostly when we talk of conflict, there is the assumption that we're talking about this negative thing that has come to disturb the existence of humanity. But when you look at the intricacies of it, conflict actually has a positive side. There are positives to conflict. And it's important to understand this, that it's not everything about conflict that is negative. Some things are extremely positive, all right? So for instance, conflict teaches us to make the most of each situation, okay? It's important to use it as a learning opportunity or a leadership opportunity. Most people have found themselves taking strong leadership opportunities during a time of conflict, especially politicians. Conflict comes as a very opportune point in which to express or to grow political mileage, because conflict creates a gap. Wherever there's a conflict, then there's need for leadership, because one must then either mediate or one must then either guide, okay? One must advise, one must lead. So whenever there's conflict, it's not always that it is negative. Sometimes it is positive. Where there's conflict, you might have the opportunity to lead others in the right direction. Where there's conflict, you might have the opportunity to mediate between two parties and to sow friendship that is lasting. All right? So it can also be used as an opportunity to transform situations into something better. Okay? So conflict can be used as an opportunity to transform a situation into something better. Where there was a negative activity, because of conflict, you come in and transform it. Okay, for instance, already the world has come to terms with the fact that the society post COVID-19 will not be the same as it was before. People will be more technologically, adapt, and businesses will be most likely to use certain technological devices and certain advancements in modern technology. And even people that were adamant at adapting, or what are they called? Laggards, okay? The adaptation, phases of adaptation. People that were laggards will now find themselves, or have now found themselves, having to adapt to technological devices and technological developments more quickly, because of this situation that the world has found itself in. So you can see that here comes, technology is facing resistance from several sectors of society. that may not want to use social media, that may not want to use certain applications. And here comes coronavirus, and you're told to go and work from home. And it's inevitable for you to work from home. You need to use the internet, you need to use social media, you need to use Zoom and other such appliances or applications. So it helps us to transform. It becomes an opportunity for us to transform situations into something better. So behavioral scientists such as Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kuhlman developed what has come to be known as the Thomas-Kuhlman conflict mode instrument. Okay? What they did in essence was they identified 5 styles as model to handling conflict. So these 5 styles were the models by which most of us handle conflict according to these behavioral scientists. Okay, so the 5 styles include in essence competing, collaborating, avoiding, accommodating, and compromising. Okay, that is competing. We compete when we are in conflict or as a response to conflict. We collaborate, we work with others, we avoid, we accommodate, as well as we compromise. Okay, and they were categorized as being either high or low in assertive nature or high or low in their cooperative nature. So some of them are higher in their cooperative nature, such as accommodating and collaborating. They're more cooperative, and others are low, such as avoiding and competing. These are more, they're less cooperative, whereas things such as competing and collaborating are high in their assertive nature, but they are low in their avoiding and accommodating nature. Okay, so when it comes to the development of this style, the number of conflict style inventories in active use since the 1960s, there are many. All right, so there are many conflict styles that have been developed and that behavioral scientists have come up with. We choose these because they send a very strong message. Okay, they send a very strong message, and they are able to impact our understanding of society and the way we relate with each other. So most of them are based on the managerial grid, which was developed by Robert Blake and Jen Newton. It's known as the managerial grid model. You can check it out. Also, Kenneth and Thomas and Kuhlman also now developed the Thomas-Kuhlman conflict mode instrument. Okay. What is it? This Thomas-Kuhlman conflict mode instrument. What is it? What does it entail? What does it involve? So it consists of 30 pairs of statements. Okay, 30 pairs of statements. Pair means 2. 30 pairs. So for each pair, a respondent must choose either the A or B item. So one of the items depicts collaborating, while the other depicts avoiding. The best for you is to Google this, look for this Thomas-Kuhlman conflict mode instrument, so that you can go through it also on your own after we're done here. So each pair of statements specifically designed to be equal in social desirability. So the Thomas-Kuhlman instrument uses 2 axes. They are influenced by the Newton and Blake axis. Okay, so these are called assertiveness on one side and cooperativeness on the other side. Okay. So it identifies 5 different styles of conflict, just like we said, which is competing. All right, competing is assertive and uncooperative, whereas avoiding is unassertive and uncooperative. Accommodating is unassertive but it's cooperative, whereas collaborating is assertive and cooperative, and compromising is an intermediate. It has intermediate assertiveness as well as comparativeness. So it is a tool helping people understand how different conflict handling styles affect interpersonal and group dynamics. Okay, so it will, when you use this tool, it will help you understand how do you relate with people. It will help you understand why you failed to actually participate effectively in group studies or teamwork at work Every time there's group work or team thing, you always find yourself falling out with people. This may help you to diagnose, just to diagnose, not to treat, just to diagnose what exactly. Maybe you are more, I don't know, what can we find? Maybe you're more avoiding, okay? Whenever you have a challenge and people differ with your views, you avoid to engage and you walk away. Or maybe you are too competitive, you just refuse to say no. So all these are ways that we can learn our interpersonal as well as the group dynamics that surround us. So it is also good for empowering people to choose the appropriate style for any situation. When you go through this and you test yourself, you'll be able to choose to say, okay, now that I'm faced with this particular conflict, should I compromise? Should I collaborate? Should I accommodate? Should I avoid? These are ways in which we can determine. Or should I compete? All right. So you can determine which one best works for you. So it also assesses individuals' typical behavior in conflict situations and describes it along two dimensions, just like we said, along assertiveness and cooperativeness. So it also provides detailed information about how individuals can use 5 different conflict handling modes as well as styles, the ones that we already mentioned, the 3 C's and the 2 A's. Okay, so you can be able to determine how you fall, where you fall. What is your ranking. So the strengths of this theory is that it can be quickly administered. Excuse me, long day today, so I beg your pardon with the regular yawning. So it can be quickly administered as well as interpreted. Okay, within 15 minutes you can answer all the questions, all the pairs, the 30 pairs of questions, and it can take you about an hour for an interpretation to be made by a trained person. Okay, so interpretation materials help respondents identify appropriate use of styles and help them become more comfortable with styles they are less familiar with. Compared to other conflict instruments, the TKI reduces social desirability bias from over 90% to less than 20%. So it's very favorable. Also, it is easy to understand and requires no special training or certification for you to administer it. You can administer it, I think, even to yourself, and you should be able to come up with something. But it's always good to have someone around for checks and balances. Most of the times, we tend to cut ourselves too much slack. So it's always important to have someone there just to check in, to make sure we are going the right direction. Also, among the other strengths, it facilitates learning to use these 5 practical situation-specific styles for dealing with conflict effectively. Okay, it also helps trainers and managers and other professionals to open productivity and one-on-one and group discussions around conflict. So if you're a manager or you're a trainer or you're a boss or your work involves people and their interactions, it can be helpful for you to determine why there is less productivity and increased conflict. Sometimes in the workspace, there's just too much conflict, and these techniques can help us understand how best we can deal with conflict. So it reflects today's gender, racial, ethnic, age, and job level diversity in the workplace based on an updated normative sample. Okay, team building. Also, it can improve team functioning by helping members reconcile differences and work together more effectively. When you've identified what it is that brings you down or how it is that you function best, you can then immediately work on it, and as a team you'll be able to understand that person X is more competitive, and that is why they tend to come out as strong. It's not that they're being offensive to you or deliberately or intentionally attacking you, no. Or you can understand that person Y is often avoiding, and that is why their views rarely make it to the table, because whenever you say, but why do you think it's like this, they shy away from giving a follow-up answer. Okay, so it can also help in leadership development. It enhances a leader's conflict management skills when you practice this often and you use it regularly. Okay, It can help as a leader for you to enhance your skills. So stress reduction, excuse me, it gives employees capacity and tools to identify and manage workplace stress. Performance as well, it gives performance improvement. It helps eliminate barriers to effective performance. And retention, it helps employees be successful and improve morale, and they stay engaged in order to build a strong organization and retain best talent. Okay. Among the weaknesses, however, because whenever there's a positive, there's always a weakness, and that is the nature of life. So even with the Thomas Kuhlman conflict mode, there have been certain criticisms. Excuse me, I really need to work on that. I think it's best to agree that the class is better had in the afternoon, because in the evening most of us are very tired, including the teacher. So, however, this does not in any way affect the quality of the knowledge I'll deliver to you. Yeah. All right. So, among the weaknesses, Mr. John, thanks for coming through. Among the weaknesses, some respondents find the forced choice style of questionnaires as being frustrating. This could be a result of minimized social desirability bias, making it difficult to choose the answer that looks better. Okay. When we look at accommodating, people who are accommodating. So people who accommodate are unassertive and very cooperative. They give in during a conflict. Whenever there's a conflict, they'll give in, as opposed to fighting or whatnot. They acknowledge they made a mistake or decide it was no big deal. Forget about it, it doesn't matter. This is the people who are accommodative too. Also, they put relationships first. People who are accommodative tend to ignore issues and try to keep peace at any price. So whenever there's a conflict, if you're dealing with someone who's accommodative, they'll say to themselves, which one is better, winning this argument or keeping this relationship? And oftentimes, the latter wins when it comes to people who are accommodating. Also, they are effective when the other person or party has a better plan or solution. Okay? So when someone has a better plan or solution, they're very effective. They come through and they ensure that person's suggestions go through and have positive response. So people who use accommodating often neglect their own concerns to satisfy the concerns of others. Accommodating is the opposite style of competing. People who accommodate may be selflessly generous or charitable, and they may also obey another person when they would prefer not to, or yield to another's point of view. They may work against their own goals or objectives to reach a desired outcome. So they may have views, strong views, but because they're accommodating in their conflict style, they tend to shy away to allow the views of others to be more predominant. So they may have to give in to reach a desired outcome. And accommodating people may preserve future relationships with a conflicting person or party. Sorry, excuse me again. So they may preserve future relationships. Okay, so if you're looking at preservation of relationships, accommodating people are the best to have around. Then there's the second group, there's avoiding. Okay, people who avoid. So people who avoid conflict, generally, they are unassertive and they are uncooperative. Okay, they avoid the conflict entirely or delay their response instead of voicing out their concerns. They can create some space in an emotional environment. Okay, they are not a good long-term strategy. So avoiding is not a very good long-term strategy. You can't continuously and completely always just avoid. Sometimes you need to be a bit assertive. Sometimes you need to be a bit cooperative, whichever. So when someone uses avoidance, they are not helping the other party reach their goals. They are not assertively pursuing their own as well. Okay? So to do so, they may diplomatically sidestep or postpone the discussion until a better time. You know what? Let's talk about it later. I'm tired. I'm having a headache. Why don't we pick that up? I'll call you back. All those are methods of avoiding. So they withdraw from the threatening situation or they divert attention. Okay? They perceive conflict as hopeless and therefore something to be avoided. Differences are overlooked and they accept disagreement. Okay? You have a conflict and for them they just say, whatever, let's forget about it. It doesn't matter. Okay? So to do so, they may diplomatically sidestep or postpone the discussion. Also, this works when the issue is trivial or when you have no chance of winning. Sometimes you may not be avoiding in nature, but you're faced with a conflict that, according to you, is just trivial. It's not a conflict that you should prolong. and so you tend to avoid. Or sometimes you look at a conflict and realize there's nothing for me here, so you tend to avoid. So it is also very effective when the atmosphere is emotionally charged and you need to create some space. Okay? Sometimes when you're dealing with an issue and there's a lot of emotion involved, to create some space, some breathing space for the emotions to cool down, you avoid. Okay? And sometimes you take the assumption that issues will resolve themselves, but in general, avoiding is not a good long-term strategy. Just like the old saying goes, hope is not a strategy. Okay? You can't hope. You can't use hope as a strategy for conflict resolution. You need to take what's the phrase, the bull by its horn. Okay? So the next one is collaborating. So collaborators are both assertive and cooperative. Okay, they assert their own views while also listening to other views and welcoming differences. They seek a win-win outcome whenever they're presented with a situation. Excuse me. They hope to win as well as to ensure that another person also gets the best out of a disagreement. So they identify underlying concerns of a conflict. Okay, they create room for multiple ideas. They're open. They create room because they're collaborative, as well as people who are collaborative. They work together to make a plan to improve a situation or achieve goals for both parties. They attempt to work with others to find solutions that fully satisfy the concerns of both parties. So this requires time and effort from both parties. All right. So this can be effective for more complex scenarios where a novel situation is needed. This can also mean reframing a challenge to create more room for everybody's ideas. Okay? So the downside is that it requires a high grade of trust. For you to work with someone in a collaborative nature, you need to trust them, because you are giving away your strengths and your arguments in the hope that this person will similarly meet you halfway, which doesn't always happen. So it also needs for there to be a consensus, and this can require a lot of time and effort. The reason why the conflict exists in the first place is because you have failed to reach a consensus. So for you to now have to wait until you can reach a consensus, first of all, on the direction, and then now you can, it takes time. So it takes work to get everybody on board and to synthesize a variety of potentially conflicting ideas. Collaborating is a lot of work. So people using this style, they often recognize there are tensions in relationships and contrasting viewpoints, but want to work throughout the conflict. Okay? They want to work through it, through the conflict, so that they can come up with better ways of existing with fellow human beings. Competing, on the other hand, competing people approach conflict in a competitive way. Okay, so they assert themselves. They do not cooperate while pursuing their own concerns at another's expense. They take on a win-lose approach. One person wins and another person has to lose. So for them, they do not rely on cooperation with the other party to reach outcomes, and may be appropriate for emergencies when time is important. So this method, despite the fact that it sounds a lot of aggressiveness, it may be important. It may be effective, especially when there's an emergency. Sometimes you need to just go with a hard-on approach. So to compete, people take a power orientation and use whatever power seems appropriate to win, even at the expense of the other party. So this may include arguing, it may include pulling rank, everybody coming together, or instigating sanctions. The United States often does that with other countries. So competing may mean standing up and defending a position believed to be correct, or simply just trying to win. So forcing another way to view another person, or another way of viewing competition. People using a forcing style perceive that some people are right while others are wrong. So according to them, you are either right or wrong, and most times they are right and you are wrong. And that is how competitive people are, and the nature of competitive conflict style is also. So this approach may be appropriate for emergencies, just like we said, when time is of the essence, or when you need quick, decisive action people should be aware of and support the approach. Okay, you must inform others. Say, ladies and gentlemen, we are now taking an assertive nature here, and we are going to be very competitive, and they should be able to agree. All right. So this is not a good conflict management style for handling normal conflict situations, due to the fact that it demands only one person to be completely right and the other to be completely wrong. Okay, so this is not good. You need to, and this is rarely the case with conflict. In reality, it's not a win-lose situation. Conflict oftentimes has winners. Sometimes everybody has to win, sometimes everybody loses. So most of the times, both parties need to be open to changing part of their behavior. Okay, and when we bring it to that element, that's what brings us to compromising as the other style of conflict. All right. So when you compromise, this is you're moderately assertive and you're moderately cooperative also. So you try to find fast, mutually acceptable solutions to conflicts. Okay, that partially satisfy both parties. That is compromise. You say, what can you get from it? What can I get from it? And we both partially try to satisfy each other. So this results in a lose-lose approach. Okay, when you compromise, both have to give away something of theirs in order to reach a consensus. So it's appropriate, but only as a temporary solution. You can't use compromise as a long-term goal. And that is why most conflicts that have ended in compromise tend to resume again later, because it can only be used temporarily. Also, it is considered as an easy way out when you need more time to collaborate to find a better solution. Okay, when you need more time to collaborate to find a better solution, you can use a compromise. So the concept of this being a lose-lose situation could be confusing for many. So basically, it means that no one is going to get exactly what they want, but everyone benefits in some way. So the trap is to fall into compromising as an easy way out, when collaborating would produce a better solution even though it requires more work. So sometimes collaborating may produce a better solution, but there's more work. So because of there's so much work and time that is involved in collaborating, some people just tend to compromise and say, well, you know what, let it be the way it is. So compromisers give up less than accommodators, but more than competitors. They explore issues more than avoiders, but less than collaborators. Their solutions often involve splitting the difference or exchanging concessions. Conflict is mutual difference, best resolved by cooperation and compromise. Okay, conflict is a mutual difference, best resolved by cooperation and compromise. You put those together, you have a perfect solution. So it may be appropriate for scenarios where you need a temporary solution, or where both sides have equally important goals. Then you can trade off to say, okay, let's compromise. We'll give you this and you give us that, and we meet halfway for the sake of progress temporarily. Okay. So the question is, which one is best? People would ask, you have compromise, you have avoiding, you have competing, you have accommodating and collaborating. Which one is the best system? So there's no best way to handle conflict. Okay, that is the answer. Each conflict is different and requires a different response. All right. So society teaches us that we use the following sayings to try and describe these conflicting styles. Two heads are better than one. This defines collaborating. Kill your enemies with kindness. This is accommodating. Split the difference. This is compromising. Live well enough alone. This is avoiding. Might makes right. This is competing. Okay? So there are certain people that who, when we use these sayings, they sound more familiar to you and your character. When I say might makes right, some of you relate, meaning you're competing in nature. No, I'm just, that you need to take the complete assessment with the 30 sets of questions for you to be able to actually determine. But just from your familiarity with the sayings, live well enough alone, meaning you're avoiding, split the difference, meaning you're compromising, Kill your enemies with kindness, you are accommodating. Two heads are better than one, you are collaborating in nature. So usually after getting the results of any test or assessment, the first question people ask is, what are the right answers? In the case of conflict handling behavior, there are no universal right answers. Okay? All 5 modes are useful in some situations. Each represents a set of useful social skills that you may apply, that you may use, and that may be useful to you. The effectiveness of a given conflict handling mode depends upon the requirements of the specific conflict situation and the skill with which the mode is used. Alright? So each of us is capable of using all 5 conflict handling modes. Few people can be characterized as having a single or rigid style of dealing with conflict. However, most people use some modes better than others, and therefore tends to rely upon those modes more heavily than others. Okay? That is also very common. So, in conclusion, as we end today's class, different conflict management styles used when faced with different situations. Okay, so knowing yourself and fully understanding each situation help you understand the conflict management style needed. Okay, try a scenario-based approach to test the effectiveness of different approaches to specific situations. Okay, by knowing your own default patterns, you improve your self-awareness. Once you are aware of your own patterns, you can pay attention to whether they are working for you, and you can explore alternatives. By using a scenario-based approach, you can choose more effective conflict management styles and test the effectiveness for you and your situations. Alright? What comes to mind for me, even as we conclude, is the current situation in Malawi, where we had elections and the courts nullified those elections and they ordered for a rerun, and you have the opposition coming together, forming an alliance to stand against the incumbent. And the question was always, because both of the opposition leaders are significantly powerful leaders and they control a large percentile of the population. So the question came in to say, which of these two leaders should, I think it's between Chilima and Chakwera, if I'm not mistaken, which of these two should then take up the leadership of the alliance? Okay. And yesterday, news reached us that the former vice president, who must be Chilima, had stepped aside to allow Chakwera to take up leadership as the president of the alliance, while Chilima himself would maintain as a running mate. Now you must understand that Chilima has served as vice president before. Should they win, it means he will be vice president again. The normal understanding is that when someone comes up as or is in office as vice president for some time, the next step, most likely that they would like to, everyone wants to progress, is probably to be president. And the opportunity presented itself where this guy was going to become president. But then, there was a change. And he has accepted a position that he has already held before. Should they win, there's a possibility they might not. So it's an election, that's why it exists. So that just gives you an example of the conflict management style that he has chosen. You can assess him. If he was to take the test, maybe you'd come up with a certain style that is more befitting. So it's very important, even yourself in your personal life, assess yourself. Which one are you? Where are your strengths? Where do your strengths lie? Where do your weaknesses lie? Where are you more effective and most effective, or where are you least effective? And by doing that, you give yourself room to respond effectively whenever you're presented with a situation in which conflict is involved and in which you are the primary source or the primary affected person by conflict around you. So that is what today's class was about. Thank you so much for all those who've come through to join in and watch. Thank you. We will continue to give this class as often as we can, God willing, we'll meet again and pick it up from where we are ending today with conflict management styles. So we hope that you continue to observe all the stipulations that have been given in an effort to bring coronavirus to an end by washing your hands and using hand sanitizer, keeping social distance, staying home if you can, working from home, and covering your mouth and nose with mask and other such materials. So thank you so much. Also washing your hands regularly. Yeah? Thank you so much for coming through today, for those that tuned in and those that will watch after. Thank you. We're working on modalities to have these classes posted on YouTube for longevity, we can have them there longer. Thank you so much, and God bless you. All right, good night.